So I think one of the first things to think about with AI is to not throw out all of the very good, ordinary, everyday business thoughts and processes that we carry with us. I think there's a real temptation when we get into artificial intelligence or indeed any other emerging technology to sort of do away with those good commercial best practices. Usually, as a rule, if you ask a good fundamental business question and someone's answer begins with, that doesn't really apply in AI because, usually the rest of that sentence is a lie. So I think the first thing that you need to do is make sure that you're grounding your thought process in your usual business processes. At the risk of being reductionist, broadly, any business doing anything tends to be doing it for one of three reasons. It's either doing it for brand reasons, to get headlines, to get attention, and to be viewed by the market as being innovative. That's a really dangerous motivation, by the way, because there's nothing that looks beggier and more try-hard than looking like you're trying to look innovative. So I think the key there is actually doing something that's innovative versus trying to appear so. The second reason they might do it is to drive top line, make more money. That's an obvious and really valuable business driver, and I think it's important at the outset to have conversations around what good looks like. So if at the end of this project we make 50 grand, is that enough? Is that enough? If so, great. If not, how much is? And then being really honest and really disciplined and diligent and self-reflective at the end of the project to reflect and figure out whether or not it's been a success. I've lost count of the number of times that I've seen large enterprise adoption of an emerging technology under the auspices of driving more top-line revenue, and at the end of the project they make a very small amount of revenue, and internally they discuss that as a success. I'm inclined to say they're being either dishonest and it wasn't actually a success, or that the motivations were never really top line. They were those headline brand reasons that just smoke. And the third reason that most organisations do anything is bottom line, to reduce costs and ultimately improve your margin. I think one of the really interesting things about AI is that usually those three things, brand, top line, bottom line, are in that order of success. It's in that order of public imagination grabbing and inches in journalism. It's usually in that order. I think the thing about AI that's fascinating is it's the first time, certainly in my lifetime, and I think many others, that bottom line technology, a technology that really is designed to cut costs, is appearing on the front page of national best-selling magazines and newspapers. That's never happened. But really, those bottom line, those cost-saving technologies are often the most valuable. I think the first way that boards can really horizon scan is to make time to horizon scan. I think it's very difficult, it's very challenging, because any board in any high-performing organisation is really busy with the stuff that's happening right now. It almost sounds glib, but I think it's important, is making that space, finding that time to horizon scan in the first place and think about what might be coming along a slightly longer time horizon than perhaps we're used to dealing with. In terms of having these skills on the boards to conduct those conversations, I think there's a number of approaches to that. I think some boards are very, very fortunate that they have these skill sets required to properly horizon scan internally and do it themselves. Some boards are that fortunate. I've never seen one, and I think it's a very fortunate and I mean, perhaps beautifully constructed, but I think lucky board that has that skill on their main board. I think there's a couple of approaches to doing it. The first is to have a advisory board that sits adjacent to that core board. The National Theatre, for example, has a digital advisory board that comprises some of its main board members and some externals, myself included, who will meet periodically, discuss priorities with the main board, conduct a bit of blue sky thinking, do a bit of a gap analysis of things that they might have missed, and bring that external advisory capability to the main organisation. I think that is a very well-trodden path for many organisations. The other option, and obviously have to declare an interest at this point, is really, this is the purpose of consultancies. I think we have all seen we've all seen consultancies used for things that I don't think actually promotes great behaviours. And I think we have all grown tired and slightly cynical at the somewhat parasitic, vampiric relationship that big consulting can have on organisations. But actually, for a very discrete task that is not core to an organisation and therefore isn't an in-house capability, but is specialist and is important and is valuable, I think that's the role of a good consultancy and a good external advisor to come in and provide that. When we do horizon scanning, there's a number of ways in which we can slice and dice it. There's looking at the existing capabilities within the organisation and then mapping on a pre-selected group of technologies or technology movements to figure out how they might affect those business capabilities. There's the totally blue sky thinking, which doesn't really layer on the company at all and purely looks at technology trends and then technology impact on certain sectors, which hopefully will include the organisation doing the horizon scanning. And then there's a bit of a hybrid of both. But really, I think it's the role of a really good consultancy and a specialist consultancy that advises and works in these spaces all of the time to support boards in doing that thinking that they might not have the skills and certainly not have the time to do themselves in any great depth. So we've done a lot of thinking recently about how organisations should prioritise their actions and interventions around AI in particular, not least that it's grabbing the headline and it's surfacing at people's dinner table in an evening and it's really capturing the public imagination. I think the default reaction of particularly large enterprise when it comes to any new technology is to build something and in-house the capability, which often is a really important thing to do. I think the risks in doing this within AI are greater, not least because of the speed at which developments are taking place, ranging from new foundational models that are sort of by orders of magnitude improving the performance of their predecessors through to the changing players in space. As we're recording this, OpenAI is mid-implosion, and we're seeing the various Game of Thrones going on at a board level there between them and investor and board members, etc. So really, when we're advising larger enterprise, we see it in three ways. Firstly, securing the core, protecting the business from a data protection, cyber security perspective. And the best way of doing that is to invest a relatively modest amount of time and energy creating a private environment that leverages all the latest technology, but is a safe sandbox within which the workforce globally can experiment and move fast without breaking many things in a safe and secure way. That is not that big a job, but it's critical if you want to protect especially the sensitive data that no doubt they'll be dealing with every day. That might range from, in a law firm setting, client data, in a technology company setting, source code to some of the valuable products, and everything in between those two things. Creating that private, secure environment, securing the core of the business is a really important thing to do first before you do anything else. The second, I think, is to look for some quick wins. Again, it doesn't have to be that expensive. I think we should be talking about tens of thousands of pounds at most and weeks at most, but picking things that can very, very quickly improve the quality of life and efficiency and effectiveness of your business at various levels, and in so doing, winning people over. Nothing makes someone a stronger advocate for your thing than making their life easier and better. I think the beauty of AI, certainly contrasting with many other emerging technologies that we do a lot of work with, is there are quick wins everywhere. So, for example, within our organisation, having a chatbot that you can query that says, how much leave have I got left this year? I mean, that's a very, very simple data model task, but it makes people's lives easier and it means people use it. Automated, putting the tool in the hands of users and giving them suggested use cases to sort of whet their appetite and get them going, makes them advocates, brings them on board. Again, all of this has to have that securing the core private environment within which to operate, but can really, really help build advocacy and support and buy-in from the business of all levels. So if you're listening to this and you are a senior exec within a business, need to bring everyone else on side, make their life easier. If you are a mid-level manager and need to bring your senior execs on board, make their life easier. It's very simple, and I was going to say it's easy to say, hard to do. I hate that hard to do. So do those quick wins, those low lift, relatively low effort, relatively low cost solutions that really bring people on board. And the final thing is, once you've secured your core and you've taken those quick wins, really think about the bigger things that you would like to do. The world is somewhat your oyster here. You can the capability of AI models available now is ever increasing, ever improving, and you can do some really quite powerful and impressive things. I'm thinking of two projects that we're currently working on. One that involves the use of spatial data analysing footballers' performance in game. Another one is analysing the royalties being claimed by musicians against all of the licensing and royalty agencies globally. Those are just two radically different approaches, radically different applications and use cases, both of which are extraordinarily valuable and powerful if executed on properly. I think the first thing I would say there is the world is your oyster. You can do anything, you can't do everything. And so picking and prioritising is incredibly important. And again, returning to those core business principles, pick the things that are aligned to your business strategy, not just the things that are coolest. And that might sound somewhat patronising, but again, I've lost count of the number of times I've seen businesses confuse cool with strategically aligned. And the second, which is an important point, is again recognising the speed at which developments in this space are taking place. Do not wed yourself to a foundational model if you can help it. You are, unless you are a venture capitalist picking winners, your job is not to pick winners. Your job is to build a system that works and delivers value for your organisation. So try and ensure that anything that you architect, anything that you deliver, anything that you engineer, anything that you really commit meaningful, and I mean hundreds of thousands of pounds and months of your organisation's resources towards, are somewhat foundation model agnostic, which means that when GPT-26 comes out, you can swap in GPT-25 and make sure that you're using the latest thing without having to totally rewrite and redo vast amounts of your code base and reinvent the data pipelines that you've put in place. Foundation model agnostic is a very relatively easy thing to say. It is harder to achieve, but it is possible. In making sure that you reduce the lift required to swap in and out new models is a really important thing for large enterprises. So I think the first thing to do is ask them questions and think carefully about their answers. That sounds like a rather basic, glib question, but the number of times I've seen large enterprise procure emerging technology solutions, including AI, in which they've asked their vendors questions and the answers haven't really cut the mustard, yet they've still been instructed. It somewhat blows my mind. So what does a good answer look like? One, it looks like one that's given there and then. Occasionally your advisor might want to take things away and speak to the team or do something else. But I think it's reasonable for you to expect them to be able to give a hot take on the questions that you're asking, unless what you're asking is so radically unusual or bespoke or technically deep that it's reasonable for them to go away. Ask them questions and expect answers. The second is expect to understand the answers they give you. If your advisor is answering questions in sort of opaque and overly complicated language and parlance, they may be a genius, but they ain't going to help your organisation improve internally, because if you can't understand them, the rest of your team won't be able to either. Again, I think there's a real tendency in emerging tech, AI included, to hide behind relatively complex terminology and language that I don't entirely understand why vendors don't realise. It doesn't make them sound intelligent. It just confuses and annoys the prospective purchaser. One of the things we really pride ourselves on here is talking in plain English. The third thing I do is ask them what they've done before. I think, and I think there's a couple of things you're testing for there. One just is basic track record. You don't want to be anyone's guinea pig, and you want them to be able to point to other projects. Hopefully they'll be able to name the client name, though I appreciate that's not always possible, and give you some comfort that this isn't their first rodeo and they've done this before. I think the other thing it tells you is how long they've been doing these things for. The number of prompt engineer experts that I've seen pop up in the last 12 months, who 2 years ago were NFT experts and 3 years before that were metaverse influencers, totally blows my mind. I think you can tell people that have deep expertise, and you don't get deep expertise in 6 months. And so ask them, well, when was the first one of these that you did? When did you first build a large language model? And we talk about, I think we built our first large language model in 2018, and have obviously done many since then. That slightly blows people's mind. I was last week in a meeting when they said, "You've been doing AI since 2018. I thought it was only invented a year ago." Like, no, that's no, absolutely not. And so asking them those track record questions, I think is really important. And finally, I would ask to meet various members of the team. Many organisations have one prodigy, one deeply impressive individual who can talk the talk. It's unlikely you're going to get to work with them throughout the life of the project. And so don't be afraid to ask. It would be great to meet other members of the team. I think a good, credible, deeply expert organisation will see that as an opportunity and say, yeah, fantastic. I love nothing more than when organisations say, oh, it would be great to meet someone. I can introduce them to the people that actually will be doing most of the delivery on that project, whether that's Alex, our CTO, or John, who heads our data science and AI work, or others that are again going to be in the project team. They're going to have to get to know very well in the coming weeks and months. I think ask those questions, insist on meeting them, and hopefully you'll get a deeper understanding of the organisation and the team that you're going to have to be working with. in order to set meaningful KPIs, you have to be really honest and self-reflective about the motivations and drivers for you doing the thing in the first place. Otherwise, the KPIs just aren't going to be relevant. So if you're doing it for brand reasons, you will use all of the KPIs and metrics that you use in order to evaluate your other brand and marketing activations. So that might be total impressions, it might be click-through rate, it might be conversion into sales, it might be the number of positive headlines, it might be the publication in a certain magazine or newspaper that you really want to feature in. All of the things that your marketing team will already know really well. If you're doing it for top line reasons, really obvious, it's how much money you make. And that can be a really challenging one, because everyone says they're doing it for top line reasons, but then when you really focus in on it, you realise that actually if they make £20 in a packet of quavers, but it features really well in the press, they're happy, then it wasn't for top line reasons, it was for brand and headline reasons. And so focusing the KPIs on those things are really important. And thirdly, there's, as is most often the case in AI, there are cost saving and bottom line motivations for doing the thing. Again, the KPIs for that are clear. At the ultimate, there is overall impact on your company's gross or net margin. Working back from that, there is our efficiencies that have been created, which might mean your people are able to spend time doing more valuable work, or you need less people. But ultimately, there'll be the same bottom line metrics and KPIs that you use to determine the bottom line of your company and the way in which you are efficiently producing your thing, whether or not you're a product or a service business. All of that, it sounds very easy to say, but I think it's important not to lose sight of those fundamental business objectives. The final thing I'll say here that I think is quite specific to AI is, and it does require a mindset shift for executives and senior successful people, is to view things probabilistically. AI models are probabilistic. They all have accuracy levels. They're never 100%. And that's, again, that requires quite an interesting mindset shift. So I trained as a lawyer, and I can vividly remember my room buddy saying to me that as a lawyer, A- is negligence. You're always seeking A+ 100%, because anything less than that exposes you, the firm, your organisation. AI requires us to think about things a little bit differently. How wrong can we be? How often can we be wrong and yet still provide value to the organisation? That's quite an uncomfortable thing to ask ourselves often, but it might be, for example, and it will depend on the use case. If you are performing brain surgery, you probably want it to be more accurate than a human surgeon. If you're not, then you are jeopardising someone's life. There's not really any middle ground on that one. If you are providing voice coaching recommendations to an aspiring singer, it probably doesn't matter if it's slightly less than 99.99% accurate, but you would probably want it to be right far, far more often than it is not. And figuring out, well, how wrong can we be? What is good enough? How often is correct okay? Or incorrect okay, in order to inch the organisation forward. And so having that, if we call that bucket accuracy, having that as a KPI, I think is a really important benchmark for the data scientist architecting the data model, the product team designing the product, and ultimately the users and the business who will be interacting and benefiting or suffering from it in equal measure. I think it's really important to make sure that any strategy you're setting is anchored in the context, and the context includes movement and development and progress. I think a strategy should probably be somewhat agnostic to specific developments. I think part of that is being outcomes focused rather than specific and prescriptive as to a foundational model or a particular use case that you may choose to deviate from. I think it's really important to avoid having specific use cases in a strategy, if at all possible, because the use case should be in service of the strategy rather than the other way around. I met last week with a board talking to them about how they might use, they are a talent agency, and how they might use AI to further their business. And in that conversation, we went down so many different avenues, ranging from digital twinning of their talent, allowing them to take part in more productions, adverts, sponsorship deals, speaking languages that perhaps the original human talent doesn't speak, through to automating workflows for their internal legal team, through to voice recognition, through to digital DNA printing to flag up deep fakes. All of those are great ideas, and some might be goers and some might not. But I think their strategy needs to sit above that and needs to be a lens through which they can evaluate and judge all of those underlying things. So embedding risk mitigation and compliance by design and legal design into emerging tech work is our raison d'etre. This is why we were founded in the first place, is that we saw too often organisations doing undeniably cool, interesting, innovative things, landing themselves in hot water and exposing themselves and their businesses and their organisations to risks that one, they just shouldn't be, and two, were totally avoidable. I think that the need to embed that risk-first approach within large enterprise innovation differs between technologies. There are many technologies that are really cool, but don't necessarily need the same level of compliance by design thinking before a large enterprise embarks on it. So 3D printing, very cool technology, very interesting technology, many implementations and use cases of that technology, but outside of perhaps pharmaceuticals and the US gun rights argument, there's not a huge amount of legal complexity within 3D printing. AI, on the other hand, is raising some pretty fundamental public policy and therefore legal and regulatory questions as to the nature of liability, the scale of potential harm and therefore potential for liability, the entrenchment of bias and discrimination and other public harms. I think it's incumbent on any organisation, and I think even more so when we're dealing with large enterprise, because stakes are bigger and they have a reputation to protect, that they think about the implication, potential impact and the potential harm that can come from doing whatever it is that they're thinking of doing. I think it's really important to make clear that this shouldn't prevent them from doing anything. I always say that if your lawyers are saying that you can't do something, unless what you're proposing is really morally objectionable, you probably just need to get into law, because usually the answer isn't no, it's not quite that way, and there's a way of achieving the outcomes that you want and doing the things you want to do in a compliant by design, safe, secure, responsible way that protects you and your organisation. The way we handle this, I mean, we're very, very fortunate and have this unique and blessed position of reaching back into the 1,500 person law firm that we sit within. We embed lawyers within every stage of our product discovery and then our product development, which means that not only can we crack on and do and build and implement the amazing strategies and products and implementations using the latest technology, but we can also run harder and faster and more cost effectively, knowing that we're not going to get tripped up by a really, really critical and potentially scary liability or exposure point later on down the line.